Do you have any idea how a single decision by the HOA could push my mother to the brink of disaster? Could make her cling to life by a thread she almost lost? Let me lay it out plainly, right here and now, because before we moved into this pristine-looking neighborhood, I never dreamed that something as mundane as an association rule could threaten my mother's existence. I remember that suffocating afternoon when the trouble first exploded. I heard arguing outside our front door, and my heart lurched as soon as I recognized the raised voice of a stranger. I hurried down the hallway. My mother lay in the living room, too weak to rise and investigate. I peeked out the window and spotted a woman with a severe expression, immaculate nails, and a pin on her lapel that read, HOA Vice President. She was blocking our nurse's path. Yes, the nurse who'd come to administer my mom's dialysis treatment. I felt a jolt of panic because missing even half an hour of dialysis could spark a dangerous spiral for my mother. In other words, my mother's health hung on that nurse being able to do her job. That woman announced herself as Karen, a recently appointed figure in our homeowners association. She stabbed a finger at the nurse's car parked out front, hissing about rules. I rushed outside, confusion pounding in my chest. My mother's nurse, Veronica, clutched her equipment bag anxiously, glancing from Karen to me, uncertain how to proceed. Karen snapped that this was a private community and that unauthorized individuals had no right to show up without official clearance. For half a second, I thought I must be misunderstanding. Who in their right mind would block a critical health professional from seeing a patient? But her eyes, steel gray and unyielding, told me she wasn't about to budge. She demanded documentation, some form, she said, that the HOA required for any commercial or medical service. I felt anger flush through me. My mother was in dire need of dialysis, and this woman cared only about paperwork. I tried to keep my voice steady as I explained my mother's condition. Karen shot me a frigid glare, retorting that if we wanted to live here, we had to abide by HOA rules, period. My stomach twisted with disbelief. That was only the beginning. None of us knew that this confrontation would unravel an entire web of corruption and intimidation. Veronica apologized to me. She insisted she hadn't known about strict parking guidelines, but in all her years of nursing, she'd never been barred from a patient's doorstep. I asked Karen to let Veronica pass, at least this once, because my mother's dialysis time was imminent. Karen's expression didn't soften, not 1 inch. She lifted her chin and said that the nurse better move her vehicle out of the driveway, yes, our own driveway, because it apparently violated the association's guidelines for private roads. I almost laughed at the absurdity, a fleeting thought. Who actually gave this person so much power? But instead of laughing, I directed Veronica to park slightly up the street, then carry her equipment the rest of the way. I could see the nurse's frustration, but she complied. Meanwhile, Karen remained there, arms crossed, trailing behind with an air of smug victory. My chest pounded with helpless fury. For a moment I considered telling Karen exactly who I was, a federal health inspector with the authority to hold certain health facilities accountable if they endangered patients. But something in me hesitated. I wanted to see how far she'd go with her petty tyranny, and I had a feeling this was not a mere misunderstanding. Inside the house, a wave of relief washed over me when Veronica finally began hooking my mother up to the dialysis machine. The rhythmic hum filled our living room, a sound that meant my mother's body could find some stability. My mother peered at me with trembling eyes. She mouthed a question. Who was that woman? I forced a reassuring smile, told her it was just someone from the HOA, probably confused about the nurse's parking, but inside, my anger smoldered. I'd chosen this neighborhood after seeing the tidy lawns, quiet streets, and promises of a secure community. Little did I know that security would mean extortionate fines and meddling in our private affairs, or worse, interfering with medical procedures vital to my mother's survival. That same day, after Veronica finished the dialysis session, I walked her to her car. She paused at the windshield and let out an exasperated gasp. A bright orange violation notice fluttered in the breeze, taped right next to the driver's side wiper. My face went hot. I snapped a photo of the notice while Veronica stood there, torn between fury and exasperation. She had already encountered countless obstacles during her nursing rounds, but never had an HOA so blatantly threatened her with a fine for a necessary medical visit. I apologized to her. She just shook her head, saying that dealing with gatekeepers and petty bureaucrats was sadly not unheard of, but seldom this brazen. We promised each other to speak soon, in case the harassment continued. Then she left, glancing over her shoulder at the fancy sign proclaiming, "Welcome to Maple Gardens, HOA." I stepped back into the house, and that's when I realized my mother had overheard enough to be worried. She asked if everything was okay. I feigned casual confidence, told her not to fret, that I'd handle whatever the HOA was up to. Yet, deep down, I felt the tremor of a storm brewing. I'd seen how excessive bureaucracy can strangle vulnerable people. In my professional capacity, I'd witnessed small nursing homes cut corners, endangering residents. Never thought I'd have to do a version of that fight in my own front yard. Early the next morning, well before sunrise, I heard a sharp rapping on our door. My heart leapt into my throat, half suspecting an emergency, so I rushed to answer. Sure enough, I found Karen standing outside, a clipboard in one hand, a pen in the other, and a triumphant smile on her face. She extended a form, instructing me to read and sign it. It was a compliance notice stating that all external medical personnel needed prior approval from the HOA to enter the community, along with any commercial vehicles or services. My eyes flicked through the text. I saw a mention of possible fines, threatened eviction if repeated infractions occurred, and absolutely no mention of medical exceptions for life-saving treatment. She also insisted Veronica's car was not permitted on any private roads. Apparently, we had to apply for a special pass. The sheer absurdity of it all made me grind my teeth. I asked her, "What about emergency services? What if an ambulance has to come?" She shrugged and said that ambulances would be escorted by security, but she quickly insisted that a dialysis nurse wasn't an emergency, so the normal process must apply. By then my anger was dangerously close to boiling over. Did she not understand dialysis is a form of life support? But I contained myself. I only told her I wouldn't sign anything without consulting my attorney. Karen pursed her lips, said in a clipped tone that I had 72 hours to comply or face penalties. Then she spun on her heel and marched off. I watched her leave, the echo of her heels clicking on the pavement, lingering like some arrogant exclamation point. When I went back inside, my mother was awake, eyes wide with uncertainty. She asked me why there was so much tension outside. She worried if she was causing trouble for the neighborhood by having a nurse visit. The pang of guilt in my chest was overwhelming. Here was my fragile mother, just trying to survive another day, while an overzealous HOA official treated her care as a nuisance. I forced a gentle tone, assuring her no, she wasn't causing any trouble, and that I'd make sure her nurse could come and go freely. But that fleeting thought returned. Maybe I needed to reveal my real job sooner rather than later. Perhaps that would shock Karen into backing off. Yet, something told me she was too caught up in her sense of power to be deterred that easily. The very next afternoon, I decided to look deeper into the HOA's documents. It wasn't too difficult to find them online through the official homeowner portal. Ironically, they boasted about transparency. As I scanned the bylaws, I noticed multiple references to permitted services, commercial access, and special fees. The more I read, the more I detected gaping holes, particularly in the sections concerning health services. There was a suspiciously recent amendment that restricted so-called visiting health workers unless prior approval was granted. That clause didn't exist in older versions of the bylaws. Curious, I also did a bit of digging around on the local forum for Maple Gardens. I stumbled upon a few threads from residents complaining about excessive fines for petty infractions. I got fined for my granddaughter's stroller blocking the sidewalk. Or, they threatened me for planting marigolds in my front yard. I noticed one name kept appearing in these stories. Karen, the new vice president. She seemed to be the iron fist behind every clampdown. Eventually, I reached out to Lucy, an older neighbor who rumor said was well acquainted with the HOA's inner workings. I found her pottering in her small garden, and she looked anxious but relieved when I asked if we could speak privately. Lucy admitted Karen's apparently best friends with the association's treasurer. They allegedly hiked fees and penalties to pad some mysterious budget line. Lucy recounted how her own daughter's physical therapist had been warned for parking near the curb a few months back. Lucy had paid a fine, too afraid to fight. She lowered her voice, glancing around like Karen might be lurking behind a bush. She confided that the entire situation felt like a money grab, with the HOA justifying each new penalty as a measure to maintain quality standards. Except the money seemed to vanish into vague improvement projects. Lucy ended with a tremulous sigh. I wish someone would stand up to them. That phrase stayed with me. The image of my mother's face flashed in my mind. How reliant she was on timely dialysis. If the HOA was bullying residents using arbitrary rules, who's to say we were the last? That evening, I sat in my small office and flipped open a folder of notes I'd amassed. A half-dozen violation notices, random printouts from the bylaw, snapshots of the bright orange ticket on Veronica's car. I wrote in big letters, "Medical exemptions?" The next line, "Check local code. Does HOA have legal authority to block essential care?" My pulse sped up. As a federal health inspector, I was no stranger to bureaucratic entanglements. I'd witnessed how easily unscrupulous administrators can manipulate fine print, but dealing with an HOA that thought it could override basic human decency? That was new. I decided on a careful approach. I wouldn't reveal my profession until the time was right. I'd quietly gather enough evidence to either confront them or escalate to official channels. Meanwhile, Veronica continued to come for dialysis sessions, though she started parking out on the public road and walking a fair distance in to avoid another bright orange ticket. The next time she came, I noticed her expression was tense. She told me she'd nearly turned down our appointment because this repeated confrontation was eating up her time, and she had other patients reliant on her punctual visits. I felt a wave of guilt, but told her we would resolve it soon. A day later, Karen struck again. This time I was away buying groceries when Veronica called in a panic. She couldn't get past the front gate, where Karen and two private security guards apparently demanded to see a special permit. Veronica tried explaining this was for medical necessity, but the guards stated they were simply following HOA guidelines. Furious, I abandoned my shopping cart and drove back at breakneck speed. Sure enough, I spotted Veronica standing by her car, equipment in hand, while Karen glared at her. Anger surged through my veins. My mother's dialysis was scheduled for that exact hour, and if Veronica got delayed much longer, it could harm my mother's fragile health. I parked hastily and marched over. Karen pointed at me, lips curling in a smug sneer. "You again! I've told you we have rules here. You can't just fling them aside." The guards looked uneasy, as though they recognized the ridiculousness of it all but didn't dare defy Karen. I demanded they let Veronica through, citing medical urgency. Karen jabbed her finger at me, voice sharp. "This is a private road. We are within our rights." At that moment I raised my voice, letting a fraction of my authority show. I invoked federal statutes that protect patients' access to home health care. I said, "If you keep interfering, you're violating the law, and trust me, that won't end well." Karen's face flickered with a brief flash of alarm, but she recovered, insisting she'd be documenting all of this for the association's official records. Then, with a dismissive wave, she let Veronica pass. The tension was suffocating. I escorted the nurse to our home, my mind racing about the potential damage a delay could have caused my mother. At night, I typed up a thorough complaint letter, citing the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Fair Housing Act, and various local codes, urging the HOA to cease blocking essential medical services. I mentioned that repeated interference could lead to serious legal ramifications for them. Before I sent it, I also forwarded a copy to a friend of mine who worked as a news reporter. She found it appalling, told me to keep her updated. There was interest in exposing overbearing HOAs that crossed ethical lines. I was hesitant at first. Publicity might make Karen even more vindictive, but my mother's life was at stake. Meanwhile, day after day, I found new violation notices taped to our door, complaining about everything from unauthorized medical visits to improper attire of visiting nurse, an utterly insane claim. Veronica always wore standard medical scrubs. It was a tactic, bury me in worthless citations, hoping I'd cave under stress. One day, Lucy and a few neighbors pulled me aside in the late afternoon. They said they'd had enough, that fines were piling up over trivial matters, or having a wheelchair ramp that wasn't in compliance with aesthetic guidelines. I suggested we document it all, maybe approach the county or a local journalist. Lucy nodded, voice trembling, saying they'd tried complaining quietly in the past, but the board had ignored them. Karen was in bed with the treasurer, and the president of the HOA didn't want to rock the boat. This time, though, we had me, a determined new resident whose mother needed life-sustaining dialysis. About a week later, my friend at the news station indicated interest in doing a segment about Maple Gardens HOA. We planned a time for her camera crew to interview me about my mother's predicament. I only hoped that going public wouldn't escalate the harassment. Sure enough, on the day of the interview, Karen appeared, scowling at the reporters, demanding that they leave her private community. The reporter calmly reminded Karen that we were conducting the interview on my own property, which was not HOA communal land. Karen threatened to call the police for trespassing. The reporter simply said, "Please do. We'd love to get their perspective on all this." Karen's face twisted with rage. She stormed away, her remarks about serious repercussions drifting on the breeze. Within a few days, the local channel aired a short piece about HOAs that strong-arm residents. They highlighted my mother's case, even showed footage of Karen's outburst. Public reaction was immediate. Dozens of viewers called in, sharing their own tales of overzealous HOA boards. It seems we weren't alone. Our local county office received enough complaints to warrant a preliminary inquiry. The county scheduled a hearing to review Maple Gardens' new bylaws and the allegations of them blocking essential medical care. Karen retaliated by sending out new compliance forms with even stricter rules. She declared that any outside caregiver or therapist had to apply at least 5 business days in advance before setting foot in the community. The fine for ignoring this soared to $200. She also added a separate penalty schedule for repeat medical violations, as though dialysis visits were some pesky intrusion. However, word spread that many residents were furious. A cluster of them posted flyers around the neighborhood: "Stand up to bullies. Attend the county hearing." The day of the hearing arrived. I took my mother's doctor's note, multiple violation notices, printed screenshots of the HOA's bylaw changes, plus testimony from Lucy and 2 other neighbors who'd faced similar intimidation. The meeting room was crowded. Among the county commissioners sat a few staffers to record testimony. Karen strutted in with a well-dressed attorney, looking confident. The attorney argued that Maple Gardens had the legal right to regulate entry to ensure safety, and that the community was never blocking medical care, only requiring it to follow set procedures. The commissioners asked if there was any evidence of actual harm. That's when I stepped forward, laid out the times Veronica was delayed, the fines threatened, and how these obstructive practices endangered my mother's health. I explained that dialysis is not optional or easily rescheduled. Any delay can be physically detrimental. Lucy and another neighbor, Martin, each shared experiences of being slapped with fines for medically necessary visits. Martin revealed he'd been penalized for allowing a physical therapist to park in his driveway. Lucy recounted how Karen threatened to remove her wheelchair ramp if it wasn't repainted to match the neutral tone of the community. The commissioners looked increasingly troubled. Once I mentioned that I was a federal health inspector and had already started gathering data for potential formal complaints, a hush fell over the room. Karen's attorney tried to interject, but the commissioners asked him to wait. When Karen finally spoke, her tone was defiant. She insisted these rules were about maintaining order and preventing miscreants from sneaking in. "We're not trying to harm anyone," she said with a tight smile. I countered that this wasn't a matter of wanting to break small rules. It was about my mother's life. More voices from the audience chimed in. Even those who hadn't personally faced medical blockades felt outraged by the idea that someone's basic health treatments were overshadowed by petty protocol. By the end of the hearing, one of the commissioners gave a stern admonition. Any HOA policies that inhibit medically necessary visits can be deemed discriminatory under various federal and state statutes. They urged Maple Gardens to suspend its new rules immediately and revise them to allow medical exemptions. They also hinted that a deeper investigation could be pursued if the HOA didn't comply. Karen's expression betrayed a flicker of panic. Her carefully cultivated aura of control cracked under the weight of the commissioner's stance. Her attorney attempted to salvage the situation by proposing a compromise, but the commissioners insisted on full compliance with existing laws. That day felt like a victory, but only partial. I heard rumors that Karen was furious, telling certain board members that she wouldn't be bullied by county officials. Within a week, however, an official notice slipped under each door in Maple Gardens. The HOA would suspend all fines and mandatory wait periods for medical visits, at least temporarily. My neighbors breathed a weight lifted off my shoulders. My mother could proceed with her dialysis schedule unimpeded, and Veronica expressed cautious optimism that the worst was behind us. But things escalated further behind the scenes. Lucy later informed me that some of the HOA's finances were being audited. The county had requested detailed records of the funds collected from fines. Since Karen and the treasurer were rumored to be close, the suspicion of misappropriation loomed. Over the next few days, the tension in the neighborhood was palpable. Karen was rarely seen in public. On the occasions I did spot her, she shot me a venomous glare, as if blaming me personally for her predicament. I learned from a whispering neighbor that Karen had gone door to door in certain areas, trying to rally supporters to protest government overreach. The result was underwhelming. Most people seemed fed up with her brand of intimidation. One Sunday morning, Lucy came knocking with news. Karen had just resigned from her vice president post for personal reasons, leaving the HOA leadership in a scramble. The short resignation letter apparently cited undue stress from a hostile environment. In reality, we all suspected it had more to do with the audit, the county's threats, and the negative publicity from the TV segment. The treasurer also stepped down soon after. Officials began investigating the finances. A new caretaker board was formed, composed of residents who pledged more transparency and fairness. They put a temporary freeze on fines, promising to revamp the bylaws to clearly allow medical staff, emergency vehicles, and caregivers 24/7 access. Meanwhile, life in my household settled into something resembling peace. My mother stopped asking if the nurse would be allowed in each time her treatment approached. Veronica no longer had to park a mile away. We even began forming genuine friendships with some neighbors who had avoided us initially, perhaps out of fear of Karen's wrath. I felt that subtle shift in the air, as though a thick fog had lifted, replaced by fresh optimism. That's not to say Karen disappeared entirely. I glimpsed her a couple of times, once walking to her car with a large box in hand, presumably removing belongings from the old HOA office, which she could no longer control. Another time I saw her arguing with someone in hushed tones near the mailbox station, likely about the ongoing audit. Some neighbors claimed she was planning to move out of state. At that point, I bore her no ill will. I simply wanted my mother to have a safe, dignified living environment. Weeks went by. The county followed through on a deeper look into Maple Gardens' finances. Preliminary findings suggested that a significant portion of fine money had been going to questionable community projects that never materialized, like a new clubhouse and upgraded landscaping. The new caretaker board, under pressure, pledged full cooperation. For me, the most pivotal outcome was that not a single caretaker or nurse was blocked again. If the old guard had intended to scare us into compliance, they'd failed spectacularly. Instead, they'd spurred the entire neighborhood to wake up and demand accountability. One afternoon, as my mother dozed in her recliner after a dialysis session, the local news station did a follow-up broadcast about HOAs that had overstepped their bounds. Maple Gardens was mentioned as a success story of residents banding together to resist authoritarian tactics. They interviewed me briefly. I reiterated the importance of safeguarding essential health care. Then they aired a soundbite from Lucy, who cheerfully reported how the new HOA board was drafting clear guidelines, ensuring that nobody else would face the same ordeal. The segment wrapped up with the anchor praising community unity as a powerful force. Afterward, I closed my eyes, reflecting on the madness of it all. The nurses' visits now continued without drama. My mother had begun to relax, finally feeling that Maple Gardens might become the peaceful haven we had originally imagined. And for me, the entire ordeal reaffirmed a truth I'd witnessed before in my professional capacity. A handful of opportunistic officials can do great harm if left unchecked, but an informed and united community can bring them to heel. I will never forget the day Karen first blocked Veronica at our doorstep. How my mother's health was at her mercy for no legitimate reason. If there's any takeaway, it's that no organization, whether an HOA, a nursing home, or a corporation, should be allowed to exploit vulnerable individuals. Even though Karen had a brief reign of intimidation, she ultimately faced consequences once enough people stood up. Life carries on. The new HOA board continues to update policies, including a dedicated clause about medical access that prohibits anyone from stopping ambulances, nurses, or doctors at the gate. Monthly reports are posted online, showing exactly how funds are spent. Lucy, with her bright spirit, has taken to checking in on other elderly neighbors who might need help. Veronica, for her part, says Maple Gardens now feels like a completely different place. As for Karen, rumor has it she placed her home on the market. Not many people talk to her these days. Some claim she's hoping to escape any lingering legal trouble once the financial investigations wrap up. I can't say I wish her the worst. I simply hope she learns that power must be wielded responsibly, especially when people's lives hang in the balance. Now, on quiet afternoons, my mother sometimes rests with a gentle smile instead of nervous apprehension. It's a precious sight. It reminds me that our fight was never just about a fine or a compliance form, but about preserving a loved one's life. If any viewer or reader ever finds themselves wrestling with an overbearing HOA, or any system that puts bureaucracy over basic human decency, remember this: you have rights, and those rights are not negotiable. Don't hesitate to rally neighbors, contact the media, or invoke legal channels. Doing so could be the difference between life and tragedy. That night, after everything began to settle, I sat in my small office once again. I studied the stack of letters, the older bylaws, my typed-up complaint to the authorities. A wave of relief swept over me. No more surprise knocks at dawn demanding worthless compliance forms. No more sabotage at the front gate. In a way, this entire fiasco proved an odd kind of blessing. It brought the community together, inspiring neighbors to look out for one another. Maple Gardens, ironically named, might finally bloom into the supportive environment it was always meant to be. Still, I keep a record of all those bizarre violation notices. The bright orange ticket pinned next to a printout of Karen's ultimatum stands as a reminder that complacency is dangerous. People like Karen thrive on intimidation until they meet firm resistance. The next time an overzealous official tries to trample on essential rights, be it in housing, health care, or beyond, I'll be ready to fight back even harder, not just for my own family, but for anyone who needs a voice. If you reading or listening to this happen to find yourself in a predicament where an HOA or any organization attempts to steamroll your well-being, heed this lesson. Stand your ground, gather evidence, enlist allies. It might feel daunting. You might be tempted to move or give in, but letting fear rule only emboldens the bullies. By confronting Karen and exposing the financial irregularities, we restored balance, ensuring the place is safer for everyone. With that, I look over at my mother, resting in her recliner, the dialysis machine set up nearby. Veronica is finishing the session, checking the vital indicators. Outside, the sky is turning pinkish-orange, the setting sun painting Maple Gardens in warm hues. There's a sense of serenity in the air that was missing just weeks ago, replaced by fear of petty fines and those cold stares from Karen. Now, the security gate stands open for essential services. No one gets hassled for caring for the sick or disabled. This is how it should be. This is what community truly means. My mother waves a hand in my direction, inviting me to sit for a moment. I kneel beside her. She thanks me for fighting, for not letting them push us around. I tell her it was no more than any son would do, that I merely showed Karen how fragile her so-called power was when faced with the law and determined neighbors. But I also acknowledge that many folks in the world remain intimidated or unaware of their options. In the end, knowledge is power, especially when harnessed by unity and moral conviction. Yes, I was prepared to use my standing as a federal health inspector to challenge the HOA, and that leverage helped me gather crucial evidence. But anyone can mount a formidable defense with enough determination, alliances, and a dash of courage. The key is not waiting until it's too late. As much as Karen wanted us to crumble, she never realized the strength that compassion and community can muster. The memory of her scornful glare, so full of misguided authority, still lingers in my mind, but I try to let it go. In a twisted way, her interference served as a catalyst for a deeper bond among the residents. Now Maple Gardens has a new, more transparent board that prioritizes real concerns, like health, accessibility, and genuine safety, instead of arbitrary fees. If that isn't a testament to the power of communal effort, I don't know what is. So, if you ever pass through Maple Gardens, you might notice the quiet streets, the neatly trimmed hedges, and the smile of a nurse or therapist going about their business without hindrance. You might find Lucy tending her flower beds, unafraid of citations, or neighbors exchanging friendly waves instead of suspicious glances. And though Karen's house stands with a for sale sign, overshadowed by the changes sweeping through the neighborhood, her mark on this place remains a cautionary tale. Power, unchecked, can quickly become tyranny, but kindness, solidarity, and a willingness to fight for what's right can turn even the ugliest conflict into a chance for growth. My mother's dialysis machine shuts off with a soft beep. Veronica packs up her equipment, relieved that she can leave without a run-in at the gate. Mom thanks her warmly. I walk Veronica out, letting her know I appreciate all she's done for us, despite the hostility she endured. She smiles, remarking how glad she is that Maple Gardens is no longer a labyrinth of petty rules. We share a small laugh about the absurdity of the situation. Who would have guessed the biggest enemy for a home care nurse would be an HOA? As we reach the driveway, I watch Veronica climb into her car, no violation sticker lurking on the windshield. A gentle evening breeze rustles the trees, reminiscent of the new calm that settled over this once intimidating place. Returning inside, I sink into a chair, inhaling slowly, letting the tension of these past weeks dissolve. My mother, quietly resting, meets my gaze, and there's an unspoken gratitude in her eyes. We both know how close we came to deeper trouble. If Karen had succeeded in her crusade against medical visitors, who knows how many times my mother's treatments could have been postponed, with dire consequences. But that's all behind us now. Maple Gardens stands as a testament to what can be accomplished when people refuse to bow to injustice. We found our collective voice, demanded accountability, and reclaimed the right to receive essential care without fear. Let Karen's downfall be a lesson to any who believe they can wield community guidelines as a weapon, and let our story remind everyone that your well-being, especially in matters of life and health, cannot be overshadowed by petty bureaucracy. My mother drifts to sleep, her breathing steady, dialysis completed for the day. Looking around, I can finally see a home in the truest sense, a place where we're no longer strangers but part of a resilient network of neighbors. That sense of belonging is priceless. Ironically, Karen's efforts to isolate us only made us band closer together. Perhaps that's the silver lining in any crisis. Adversity reveals who stands with you and who stands against you. So ends the saga of the HOA Karen, who tried to stop my mother's dialysis, not realizing that she was tangling with someone ready and willing to expose her wrongdoing from a position of professional know-how. Yet, I suspect the real victory here belongs to the entire neighborhood. Our unity overcame her ambition. Our collective demand for decency forced the rules to change for the better. If just one more person is spared the agony of having to beg permission to survive, then it's a triumph worth celebrating. If you're listening to this or reading these words, and you find a parallel in your own life, some petty tyrant or board standing between you and necessary care, take courage. Arm yourself with information. Band together with others. Shine light on their actions. Most bullies thrive in darkness and fear. Once you illuminate their misdeeds, they often crumble like a house of cards. Yes, the HOA Karen thought she could push me and my mother around. She never counted on my deeper understanding of healthcare regulations, nor the unstoppable determination that comes from protecting someone you love. But in the end, that single act of arrogance, her attempt to block my mother's nurse, unraveled all her shady dealings, enabling us to reclaim Maple Gardens from the grip of oppressive rules. My advice to anyone in a similar predicament: don't doubt your power. Even if you don't have an official title or specialized legal background, stand firm. Seek out local statutes, allies, journalists, shine a spotlight on the injustice. And never forget, sometimes one voice is all it takes to spark a collective roar. Now, I glance out the window one final time. The streetlights flicker on, casting a soft glow over the sidewalk. A couple walks their dog in the distance, unbothered, unafraid of citations. The dog wags its tail happily. Across the way, Lucy waves goodnight before heading indoors. Everything seems at peace, a far cry from the tense standoffs that once plagued our corner of the neighborhood. My mother's quiet breathing is the gentle metronome that keeps me grounded. I breathe out in gratitude, knowing her next dialysis session won't be overshadowed by the specter of Karen's interference. We've come a long way, from the moment I first saw that bright violation sticker on Veronica's car to the county hearing that toppled Karen's illusions of power. It's bittersweet but uplifting, a reminder that hope thrives when good people refuse to surrender. Perhaps Maple Gardens will become a beacon for other communities struggling under the weight of an overbearing HOA. Perhaps others will hear our tale and decide they too can push back. In the end, it's about dignity, health, and the fundamental right to care for our loved ones. No scribbled bylaw can negate that. And so I close this chapter, content that our story proves something vital. However formidable petty tyrants may seem, they stand on shaky ground when confronted by truth, unity, and unwavering resolve. And that is exactly what it took to ensure my mother's dialysis, and everyone's right to essential care, would never again be subject to the whims of a power-hungry HOA Karen.